I was 8 years old when we first moved into the house on the edge of the forest. My parents had their doubts about buying a house with a backyard bordered by forest. They had concerns about wild animals getting into our bins or hurting our dogs, and were worried one of us might go too far in the trees and get lost. But it was cheap. My dad liked the seclusion, my mom loved the house itself, and my siblings and I were excited about playing in the backyard and exploring the forest. Our first sign that something wasn't right was that our dogs were absolutely terrified of the forest. They never went in for any reason. If a toy they'd been playing with found its way past the tree line, they would refuse to retrieve it. And when one of us went in, they would pace anxiously until we returned. On occasion, we'd notice the dog staring at a spot in the forest in obvious distress, sometimes growling or barking, but we could never see anything there. My brother once carried one of the dogs into the trees to show her there was nothing to be scared about, but she wriggled out of his grip and sprinted back into the house in a panic. If we were in the backyard when it was getting dark, we sometimes heard noises like someone walking through the forest, sticks crunching underfoot, branches being pushed aside. If we called out, there was no response. But if we shone a flashlight around, we would occasionally catch a glimpse for just a split second of something that we could swear looked like a person walking around in the dark. My parents quickly banned us from entering the forest at all after dark, and even during the day we weren't allowed to go out of sight of the house. My sister's bedroom window looked out on the backyard and to the forest beyond, and she remembers looking out her window one night and seeing a shadowy figure standing right at the edge of the backyard. She said there was something wrong with it, like it wasn't quite standing on the ground and it was a little too tall to be a person and sort of distorted, and she was convinced it was staring at her. She called for our dad, saying there was a man in the yard staring at her through the window, and when he ran outside to chase off whoever it was, she continued to watch the figure. It didn't move away, but when the light from our dad's flashlight passed over it, it just suddenly wasn't there anymore. We regularly heard knocking at the back door at night, with no one there. Our parents thought it was teenagers playing pranks, and stopped even bothering opening the door. Until one rainy night when the knocking was persistent and agitated. My mom pointed out that there might be someone needing shelter from the heavy rain outside, but when she opened the door, not only was there no one there, but there were no wet footprints on the porch. The knocking continued the entire time we lived there. It would happen several times in the span of a few weeks, then stop for months, then start up again. My parents eventually installed a security camera, and there was never anyone at the door. The camera wasn't all useless though. About 3 years into living there, my brother started having night terrors and sleepwalking. When he went sleepwalking, he would always go out the back door and start walking towards the forest. My mom, being a light sleeper, would hear the door open and would run out to get him just before he made it to the tree line. After the third or fourth time it happened, my brother asked to see the camera footage, because he wanted to see how he looked when he was sleepwalking, I guess thinking it would look funny. The footage showed him walking out onto the porch, then pausing as if listening to something, and shaking his head, then reluctantly walking forward as if being pulled or forcefully guided by something. One evening my dad was in the backyard, and he heard my sister calling him from the forest, seemingly in distress. Thinking she'd gone exploring in the forest and fallen over or hurt herself, he ran in the direction and started calling to her, but quickly realized it was too dark to see her, and he couldn't pinpoint where her voice was actually coming from. He told her to wait while he was inside and grabbed a flashlight. When he ran back into the house for a flashlight, he saw my sister inside, safe and completely unconcerned. At the time, my dad hadn't told us anything about hearing my sister's voice in the forest. So when I heard my mom's voice coming from the forest months later while I was outside with the dogs one evening, I didn't question it despite the fact that I'd seen my mom inside recently and hadn't noticed her walk past me. My mom was calling to me, saying she'd gotten her sweater caught in some branches and needed me to come in and help her. As I walked in, the dog started barking, alerting my dad, who saw me through the window wandering into the forest. He came outside and called to me, and I said I was just helping Mom. He yelled back that Mom was inside and I needed to run back to the house as fast as I could, which I did. After this, my parents had a fence built around the backyard and started looking for a new place. In the time between the fence being built and us moving out, it got way worse. We'd hear knocking at the door way more regularly, as well as tapping on the windows, as if someone was walking the perimeter of the house and trying every window. We would often hear scratching and scraping sounds on the fence and voices beyond it. My brother's night terrors got more frequent, and one night my mom didn't hear the door open when he went sleepwalking. Andy woke up standing at the fence, staring into the forest with the dogs barking at him. The last morning we spent there, less than 4 years after we had moved in, we woke up to find the back door fully open, and the security camera footage showed it slowly swing open on its own. Since moving out, my brother's sleepwalking has stopped, though he still gets night terrors and suffers from pretty severe anxiety. A few nights ago, he called me out of the blue, and after a bit of small talk, he asked me if I think the door being open that one final night means whatever was out there finally got in. He was trying to make light of it, saying he was getting into the Halloween spirit, joking about how maybe we should all get exercise just in case something latched onto us all those years ago. But I think he's deeply bothered by everything that happened. I know I still am a little. I still get nervous around dark wooded areas. I don't know what I think was out there in the forest behind our house at night, but I still get the feeling, given the chance, it would have swallowed us whole. My stepdad found our puppy Eddie on the side of the road. Someone had thrown him out of a moving car, and he had broken legs, broken teeth, and a swollen and closed eye, and was severely dehydrated. My stepdad took him to the vet and paid quite a bit of money for surgeries to get Eddie fixed up. He got attached to the doggo, so we ended up adopting him. After that, even though he was the family dog, he was best buds with my stepdad. Anywhere my stepdad was around the house, you would find Ed tagging along. Eddie and I grew up together, and he died when I was in college, and my parents buried him in a pet cemetery. Since it was sort of sudden and I was far away, I didn't get to say goodbye. A few months after that, I had a dream where Eddie comes and finds me. His hair is matted and dirty, and his flesh looks like it's kind of rotted, but he's wagging his tail and seems really happy to see me again. Eddie starts leading me down a hazy path, and the further we go, the faster his tail wags. Finally, we get to this giant wall of mist that extends across the entire horizon and rises higher than I can see. Eddie gets really close to it before trotting back to me. He licks my hand and gives me a couple of nose boops and whines a little. Then he turns around again and starts doing that happy dog prance towards the wall until he finally passes through it. I can sort of see his outline jumping up and down excitedly next to a human-shaped figure. I jog after Eddie and reach my hand out to touch the wall, hoping I'll be able to pass through it. That's when my cell phone rings in real life, waking me up. When I answer it, my mom is on the other end crying. My stepdad had just died of a heart attack. I have a medical background and a certification I rarely use, though I keep going back and paying to renew it. Anyhow, I volunteered almost immediately thinking how I would help those who have lived through Katrina. That was not the case. There's a few of us who were assigned once the water started to reside, to find the houses and the dead bodies in them. If you've ever had to do a body recovery when it's been lying around in the heat or water for days, sometimes weeks at a time, you know how it smells. It does sort of smell like any other dead carcass, but worse. I can't explain it. Maybe somehow sweeter smelling? Anyway, the key to not vomiting when you smell them is Vicks under and around the bottom of your nose. It doesn't keep all the smell out, but enough until you can at least tolerate the smell without vomiting. We had to go into each house and go inside in wading boots to look for bodies. Many of them had washed out to sea, but some were still in the house they had lived in prior to the hurricane. If we found a body, we spray painted a big X on the outside of the house. This other guy and I had been doing it for a while, and we got assigned to each other almost every single day. We got along okay, and he didn't vomit at the ones that had been gotten to. We came up to this one old shack. I say shack because it was pretty run down in what had been a very bad neighborhood. Right away I got chills down my spine. I knew there was something really wrong. Not like find a body wrong, but chilling kind of wrong. New Orleans has certain areas that just give off these vibes, and my understanding is there's a lot of voodoo practice in certain areas. Anyway, against everything my body was screaming at me, we went into the house. The first thing I could smell was a body. The second was something almost earthy and mold. I looked at my partner. He was white as a sheet. I could tell he was getting the same feeling I had been getting. It was obvious from the weird bones hanging from the ceiling. Something odd had been going down in the house, as well as some strange beads and carvings into the bare wood in the walls. We went into what was a kitchen, and there, chained to a beam, was an old lady, or what was left of her. She had chained herself by her wrist to the beam. Her guts were falling out onto the floor. The creepiest thing was her face still looked as if she was still alive and staring at us, with a wicked smile showing only partial teeth. My skin started crawling as the goosebumps spread over my body and my neck hair stood up. Suddenly, I heard the most unearthly cackling noise I've ever heard in my life, and my fight or flight kicked in. Jay and I noped out of there. We quickly painted the X and literally ran to the next house. Now, I don't know if that old lady had practiced voodoo or whatever, but that scared the ever-loving shit out of me. It still gives me nightmares. The people I feel sorry for are the ones who had to take that crazy lady out of there. Jay and I discussed it that night after we got back to our hotel rooms. He had heard the cackling too, but we both said it had to be the wind or something. I was driving down this back road after work trying to get home since the main road was blocked from an accident. I entered this area where there's no houses, and trees overhang the road almost like a tunnel. Well, about as soon as I entered this tree tunnel, my headlights shut off. It's like 9 p.m. in the fall, so it's pitch black. I immediately stop and back up. My reversing lights aren't working either, so I just hold the wheel straight. I'd only driven a couple of seconds in, so I was maybe 100 feet into the tunnel, but I had been reversing for about a minute at this point, and I couldn't see anything at all. I checked my phone. It's dead. Screen doesn't turn on or anything. Watch stopped ticking. Nothing electronic in my car is working. At this point, I'm looking around and I can't even see the road or the trees that were supposed to be around me. I step out of my car and look up and can't see any stars or anything. No moonlight. I walk to where the side of the road should be, and I just keep walking along a flat plane. Keep in mind, roads where I am are angled on both sides so water doesn't pool up. Yet where I was standing was completely flat. I walk backwards straight so I don't lose my sense of direction. I managed to get back into my car and start driving. I was going about 80 for a solid 10 minutes on what was supposed to be a winding backcountry road with 40-mile-per-hour speed limit, before I finally just decided to wait it out and sleep till morning, if there was ever even going to be a morning. I fall asleep, and I wake up to sunlight coming through my window, in the middle of a fucking field. In the middle of bumfuck nowhere. No houses nearby, nothing. I go to check my phone and it's dead, but the screen turns on to let me know it has no battery charge left. Car turns on and all the lights come on. Onboard GPS tells me I'm about 5 hours away from my house. In a borderline, uninhabited part of the state. Full tank of gas, no mileage difference from the day before. Watch is ticking normally and showing about what would be the correct time given the sun's position. I start the long drive home and haven't traveled that road since, and I never fucking will again. When I was 27, my mom and I got into a car accident. I remember the moment of impact and then dreaming of my mom walking away from me. I ran to catch up with her and she turned to say, "No, don't follow me," and then kept walking. After a moment's pause, I started to follow again. She turned around again and said, "Ian, don't follow me. Your daughter needs you." I was confused because I had no children. I asked her what she meant, but she continued to walk away. I wanted to follow her. I felt like I was being pulled towards her, but I stayed where I was. My next memory is of waking up in the hospital. Apparently I'd been seriously injured. My heart had stopped in the ambulance on the way to the hospital, and no one knew if I was actually going to pull through or not. I asked if my mom was okay, and I was told she died almost instantly upon impact. I chose not to tell anybody about my dream, but I did have a nagging feeling about what my mom had said about my daughter. So I asked my girlfriend, now my wife, to take a pregnancy test, which ended up being positive. My daughter is 6 years old now. Her middle name is my mom's name. Since she was a baby, it seemed like she was seeing someone who wasn't actually there. She would look over my shoulder and her eyes would fixate on something. She'd react as if someone was interacting with her, reaching out to them, smiling or giggling at them, and crawling towards them. We thought it was normal baby stuff until our son came along and didn't do anything like that. She learned the word Nana, despite none of us remembering teaching it to her, as my wife's mom is Grandma, not Nana. Recently, I was going through a family photo album my dad had given me to scan the photos, and she pointed to a photo of my mom and said, "That's Nana." I started telling her about my mom and mentioned she'd never met her, but my daughter disagreed. She said she's talked to her Nana, but couldn't remember when. She did remember that her Nana told her a funny story about how I fell into a river when I was 9, and recounted it in the same way my mom used to tell the story. I know all these things can somewhat be explained away rationally. Brains can do some wacky things during traumatic experiences, and after head injuries. It's possible I subconsciously noticed my wife's pregnancy symptoms, and that came out to me in a dream. Kids have vivid imaginations. Maybe someone told my daughter the story and forgot about it. But I like to think my mom really did save me from dying that day, and is watching over us. I also like to think that at least my daughter didn't miss out on meeting my mom. It's comforting, feeling like maybe she's still out there.